Hello, and welcome to the Hot Corner Podcast, powered by Easton. And now to our hosts, Brittney Heil and Matt Williams.
Welcome to the Hot Corner, where we'll be discussing the ins and outs of baseball and fast pitch community. I'm your host, Brittney Heil.
And I am your host, Matt Williams. It's exciting to be with you again, Brittney.
No, this is exciting. We're on to another great topic today. It's the myth of a great teammate.
The myth of a great teammate. What do you mean by the myth of a great teammate?
Well, great teammate, there's so many things fall under great teammate. And we set such high standards for ourselves to want to be a great teammate. Like, we will go to the end of the world to be a great teammate. But what is that exactly? I mean, are you supposed to be more accountable? Are you supposed to be supportive? Like, what is a great teammate? And I have thought about that for so long and just feel like that's an unattainable goal because we are human, and there's going to be days where we won't be a great teammate, and we shouldn't be necessarily penalized from it if we can learn and grow from it. Because if we can learn and grow from that, then we are still a great teammate.
Absolutely. And another thing I think is fun about this topic is great, in air quotes, great or greatness. It's one of those things that it's a good word and it gets thrown around a lot, but it's also one of those words that everybody uses. But like, what do we really mean by that? I want to be a great teammate. Well, congratulations. Like, I want to be great at something too, but what does greatness even mean? And so if we just leave it as, hey, be a great teammate, but we don't actually articulate what we mean by that, then it's just like we're talking around something without being able to figure out how to actually do it in practice.
Mm-hmm. And I think it can be a cop-out for coaches too if they're frustrated with one of their players when they look at that player and say, you're not being a good teammate. And then they just move on, leaving the player thinking, okay, what am I doing? Like, right. What do I need to do? Because sometimes, it's a coach's jobs to give their players guidance so they can be successful. So I'm excited to talk about, a different approach to being a so-called great teammate. So what we mean by the myth of a great teammate is we need to teach our players to be an accountable teammate. What do you think about that?
I like it because we are, we're clarifying what does great mean? And in the interest of simplicity, because especially when we're working with young people, it's really important that we are specific and we focus on action and clear definitions, because depending on the age, we can't give them this whole big philosophical, inspiring thing about what it means to be a great teammate, because they're like, all right, coach, what does that mean for me? Like, that sounds cool and everything, but what am I supposed to do now? So when we're talking about greatness as accountability, I think it's really important because you can't be a good teammate. You can't be a great teammate. I would argue that it's hard to be a true teammate in the genuine sense of the word if you're not accountable.
Mm-hmm. Well, Matt, when you and I started talking about this, we looked up the definition, and Merriam-Webster defines accountability as an obligation or willingness to accept responsibility or to account for one's actions. I'm going to say that again. An obligation or willingness to accept responsibility or to account for one's actions.
And I love that because, the three words that jump out to me are the first two are obligation or willingness. And, especially as we were talking, kind of thinking about what does this topic even mean? And we're talking about ourselves as coaches and, working in this industry. The bottom line is we need to get to a point where coaches and players and parents were operating from an accountability framework. Now, we would love it if everybody would show up with a willingness to be like, yeah, I want to do this because it's the right thing to do, yep. Right? Like the principal motivation is this is the best way to do it, so I want to do it. The reality is, though, even if you feel like it's more of an obligation, even if you're thinking about it in more of a transactional sense, like how do I get the most out of somebody to meet a goal? So you're thinking about it from an obligation standpoint, we're still going to be in a better place because talking about accountability is going to help players and helps teams perform at a higher level. So I love the fact that we talk about the fact that it's an obligation or willingness. Depending on our mood, depending on the day, we're probably gonna come from either of those camps. And I also just like, responsibility just jumps out at me too, because accountability and responsibility they're action oriented words, they're not passive. And so it really conveys the fact that we need to own this and we need to be intentional about it. And it's not just going to happen if we just say, hey, let's be accountable, and then you don't do anything about it. We're not going to get where we want to be. So I love that definition. And those 3 words especially stood out to me.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're owning your actions and you're responsible for your actions, if you get an entire team of 12 to 20 players, depending on the size of the team and age level, I mean, sky's the limit with that team if everybody's owning their actions. I mean, they're going to be more dependable. They're going to be putting in the work, and you don't have to worry about if your teammates are going to be doing that. They will be doing it. And for a coach, I mean, getting a team to buy in is tough sometimes, but I think if they take an approach on their players being accountable for themselves, and also, I mean, that goes, being accountable for each other, because you're going to have a bad day. And like you said, obligation or willingness, there's going to be a day where you are not willing to take responsibility for your actions. So you need a teammate to help create that obligation for you. Like, you need to step it up. We need you here, game's on the line, or we are preparing for one of the biggest games of our lives this weekend, and I need you to get it together.
Absolutely. That culture piece, a team full of accountable teammates and accountable coaches creates an environment where somebody's having a good day, somebody's having a bad day. We can all lift each other up, and you don't have to be, like you talked about earlier, we're human beings. We're going to have off days. We're going to have moments where we, say something that we wish we wouldn't have, or behave in a way that we wish we wouldn't have. But if we have a culture of accountability where everybody's working together, then that's going to help everybody improve, because all the pressure is not on one person to bring that. It's a culture of people that are genuinely being teammates and lifting each other up.
Mm-hmm. Having the definition of what the players' expectations are and that accountability with the be more dependable or put in more work rather than just be a great teammate. So Matt, let's give our listeners some examples from our past on, times we may have been good or bad. And, I'll kick this off I'll be vulnerable and talk about a time I was a bad teammate. My sophomore year, I broke my wrist about mid to late season and thought I was done for the rest of the season. I look back and see how, I was a bad teammate because I figured my season was done. And so I stopped putting in the work because I couldn't, and I was sidelined. And so instead of finding ways to help my teammates, whether that was tracking pitches or, putting balls on the tee, I, just stood in the dugout and didn't go around helping people. And I was there kind of as a so-called cheerleader because I was present and I wanted my team to win, but I wasn't doing the little things that could have bettered them because I couldn't play. I look back and just, I kick myself for acting that way because I was more of a distraction, I feel like, than helpful. But, nobody really ever came to me and kept me accountable like I should have been, like pulled me aside saying, look, you need to help us out here. We're just not giving you the uniform to wear, even though you're not playing. You need to still earn that jersey. So.
Absolutely. I mean, that brings, when I think of my own journey, I can definitely share plenty of examples of times and phases in my career where I fell short. I mean, the big one is, there's too many specific instances to point to, but just kind of a general attitude was, for a long time, it honestly took me until probably halfway through my junior year is when I really, at Duke, I should say. So what was that? I was 20. took me a long time to get to this point where my mindset changed. But for a long time, my ability to be an accountable teammate, one that was responsible for my own actions, that was willing to accept responsibility for, what the best interest of the team was, that was really dependent on how well I was hitting. I mean, pretty simple. I was absolutely obsessed with the batting average. If I started a game 0 for 2, freaking watch out, because I'm coming in the dugout hot. I'm throwing stuff. There's some 4-letter words coming out. And if you wanted to talk to me about anything, then, be careful, because I was coming in heated, and I was completely focused on myself. I wasn't being accountable to what's best for me. I wasn't being accountable to what's best for the team. And especially, as a catcher, catchers have a genuine responsibility to lead the team and manage the pitching staff. And so I was so distracted by my own selfish goals and not taking responsibility for my actions that, I wasn't able to help a pitcher go out there and perform at their best during the next half inning, or I wasn't doing my job as a catcher and everything that goes into that because I was still thinking about the at bat, the last inning. And so, that's the big thing that comes to mind with me. And the other thing that comes to mind, because I definitely saw it in myself, and I know we won't use names, but I know we've all played with teammates that were like, what, I don't want to be like that person, because that doesn't feel good to play with them or to have them on our team. And the word that keeps coming to mind is selfishness. I don't think you can. I think it'd be really difficult to be accountable in the sense that we're talking about it and be selfish at the same time. Because I think of guys that I played with, and some of them were super talented. And so that was cool. But it's like, outside of their talent, nothing they contributed to the team made the team better, because everything in their world, their actions, their work ethic, their attitude, all those things kind of revolved around what's in this for me, not what's in this for us. And so, that comes to mind too. I don't know if there's any examples, again, not necessarily using names, Brittney, that come to mind of, what the opposite. We're going to talk about what it looks like to, be good at this, but, sometimes learning what not to do or what not to be can be just as valuable as what to be. So that's what comes to mind in terms of guys I played with. It really comes down to selfishness and them only caring about themselves and not being accountable to what's going to help me, what's going to help, the other teammate that's sitting right next to us.
Mm-hmm. I think that's where the difference between a great, talking about being a great teammate, being an accountable teammate, is somebody could look at that selfish player and say, you're not being a great teammate. Well, that selfish player is going to be like, I don't care. This is about me. But if you twist that and ask them a question about, are you doing this for your team, and have them answer it, I mean, that changes the whole perspective of their outlook, and could just be that one question that triggers something in their mind like, okay, I am being selfish. This isn't helping the team. And they're able to move forward and be a game changer.
And the other thing that comes to mind too is like if we only talk about be a great teammate, well, you could easily say, okay, I'm on a team, so by definition, I can consider myself a teammate, and I'm one of the best players on the team. I'm 4 for 4 today. I'm striking people out. I'm just killing it. So therefore, I am a great teammate because I'm one of the more talented or better players on the team. And so that's another way that it's so important for us as players and parents and coaches to just really specify what we mean by great, because greatness is not the sense that we're talking about this. It's not about your talent. It's a lot more than that. It's a lot bigger than that. So yeah, it's like, congratulations. Like, yeah, you're 4 for 4, but I really don't like playing with you, and your attitude actually makes the team worse. So congratulations on your stats. But the whole reason we're here is to play together as a team and to compete and try to win the game. And you're actually making that worse, even though you are talented. So it's like that accountability piece, to your point, is like, if we're going to be a leader on the team, if we're going to be a coach that is leading our team, then it's like, I understand you're talented and that you are contributing on the field, but we need to talk about accountability to the team, to the goals that are bigger than just yourself. And it gives us an opportunity to clarify and define for our players what's going to help them and the team flourish in the long run. Because the other thing that comes to mind too is everything we're talking about, it's going to actually help you perform better. Like if we have a team full of players that are accountable, or if we're accountable, then it might feel like we're so other focused that we're going to lose track of ourselves, but it's actually the opposite. Because if we're focused on being an accountable teammate, then in many ways that's going to help us perform to our best ability. It's going to help our teammates perform to their best ability. And then all of a sudden we got a team full of accountable, talented people. We're going to go win some games and have some fun with it.
Gosh, I'm so glad you brought that up, because yeah, you just take this probably weight that's on your shoulder that you didn't realize you had because you're so focused on yourself, and it just falls off. Because when you look at those players that, are the, say, most talented that day, and it's all about themselves, I mean, what's it look like either off the field? Are people worried about them even being eligible to play? Look at it that way. Or what does it look like when they're having a bad day? Is that when they're distracting the players and throwing things in the dugout and dropping those 4-letter words to everybody, and even little kids that didn't even do anything? So,
right. And like, I love that you just talked about kind of a weight being lifted off your shoulders, because the fundamental fact about our definition of accountability is, regardless of our circumstances, we can control our attitudes and we can control how we respond to things. So the part where it's like almost freeing and allows us to perform better is that I can't control if I square up a ball and it goes right at the shortstop, right? Or I can't control if an umpire makes a bad call, or if the girl in the circle is just carving us up and dominating. It's like, it's a ball and bat sport. Like, the advantage is in the pitcher's hand. Sometimes that's going to happen. You can't control those things, but we can completely 100% control our accountability. So it's almost like an anchor, because it's like, at the end of the day, I was 0 for 4 with 2 strikeouts. I made an error. We lost, 9-1, but silver lining, I know that I helped a teammate. I know that I was accountable. And even though we didn't win the competition, I still was able to contribute to a win in terms of how I was as a teammate and how we're learning and growing together as a team. So that's the other thing that's cool, is like, it gives us something to walk away with that's a positive, regardless of the circumstances or the results.
And now, so we've talked a lot about a great teammate from the player's perspective, so if we look from the coach and the parent perspective side of this, and how they can, one, be accountable to their players because they're part of the team, and 2, what do they need to do in order to be accountable? I mean, they're the ones, the coach sets the standards, and I believe if the coach involves the players on creating their so-called rules and goals, yeah, the coach is going to have their specific rules for the team, but having the players be involved with creating, okay, so what's this accountability going to look like? What do we all want to be accountable for? Do we want to be accountable for getting to practice on time and being allowed to, communicate with the coach? Setting those standards, I think, are extremely important too, just so the player understands how they can be accountable.
100%, because, go ahead, sorry.
No, all you.
I was going to say, like, the cool part about that too is because the coach is the trendsetter, and part of where my mind goes with being an accountable coach is remembering the platform that we have as coaches, because I know that, especially, with a lot of our listeners, there's a lot of volunteer coaches. There's a lot of people that are doing this in their free time and they're not getting paid. They don't do this professionally. But the fact remains that a coach is an unbelievable influencer in the life of a young person. And your paycheck does not determine your level of influence in the lives of your athletes. So leading by example as a coach and being accountable to your actions, your behaviors, your habits, the way you communicate with your players, with the umpires, are you showing up on time? Are you showing up prepared with a practice plan, prepared with a lineup, or are you taken away from pregame opportunities to spend with your players because you're scrambling to write your lineup card right before the umpire meeting? those are the things that I think are important as a coach. And we get it, the fact that it's, everybody's busy. It's not like this is always going to be easy, but it's just so important to remember the impact that we can have as a coach. And so if we want the title of coach, then I also think part of that comes with the willingness or obligation, but hopefully the willingness to be accountable, to accept responsibility, and to account for one's actions by setting the tone and setting the example for the team.
Mm-hmm. And I'm guilty as charged for scrambling to write a lineup before a game because, I learned from that, though. That happened. And I have, this 12-year-old girl coming up to me asking for some help. And I kind of said, I can't help you right now. And I realized, okay, I need to get to the field prepared so I can focus on my players. And, unless it was a doubleheader and I wasn't able to do that, I always came to the field prepared because I know baseball's a little different, but softball, sometimes you only have about 10 or 15 minutes to get that second lineup written if you don't have it done. And then, the parent, the parent's got to be the motivator and supporter and not so much the criticizer. They need to support all aspects of the game for their son or daughter, and let the coach and teammates really drive the development part of it. The parents are there when they're outside of practice to help with development, but I think they need to be supportive of what is happening on the field and support that. Support what the coach is telling them. If they disagree, find a way to either communicate with the coach so they can better understand that they can be accountable to help their daughter or son develop the way the coach sees them, because the coach has a vision for that player. And it may not align with the parent right away, because we all have those mama and papa bears that have these dreams and aspirations for their children, but they need to make sure that they're accountable and checking to see if their vision aligns with their son or daughters and not create a vision for them.
Yeah, and I think where, a good way to think about this is that parents and coaches, especially at the youth levels, which is, the vast majority of our audience, they're partners in the development of these young people. So, obviously the kids are going home with the parents. And so we're never going to sit here and say, you should do this, that, or the other in terms of how you parent your kid. But what we are saying is, from a performance standpoint, from a team dynamic, from a culture standpoint, when it comes to being a part of a team, parents, coaches, and players, it really is one big team in terms of the culture and how are we setting up these kids for success. And so accepting responsibility and taking account for one's actions, it's like, how are the parents and coaches, how can we work together to, talk through some disagreements, to, before we start criticizing one or the other, can we have a conversation to understand where that person is coming from, to make sure that, we might still disagree, but do we trust the intent? Do we trust the heart behind it? And can we work through that disagreement so that, most importantly, we are setting an example of accountability for the young people, for the players? Because at the end of the day, the whole reason we're there is for the young people to be able to experience the power and the beauty and the transformation that sport can provide. So, yeah, with parents and accountability, another thing too, and this is parents and coaches especially, speaking as a coach, speaking as a former player, and I'm sure, Brittney, you can speak to this as well. The tone and the energy that comes from the stands can have a real impact on the game, can have a real impact on how free, and I guess free is the best word I can think of of a player to be able to go out there and compete their heart out without worrying about, if I make a mistake, am I going to hear about it from the stands? Or am I going to have to deal with this on the car ride home? So parents and coaches working together to set that accountability example for our players, because as adults, in the conversation, there's no excuse for us to not take responsibility for how we're behaving. And it's just all about what's going to set these kids up for success, because that's the thing that matters most.
Yep. And so, there could be 30 adults having a conversation about this. That's a lot of difference of opinions that could go on. So what are some questions we can give our players and our parents and coaches to ask one another on how they can be accountable? What are some things that they can do to take responsibility and find out how to own their actions?
So there's an awesome book that maybe some of our listeners have read, but it's called QBQ, The Question Behind the Question. And it's all about practicing personal accountability. And there's some guidelines here for, for asking good questions. Because, if we want to get good information, if we want to learn, then we need to ask the right questions. And I would encourage anybody listening, if you haven't already, to go get this book. It's a short read, so you can, read it really quickly. But it's just a fantastic book overall that we couldn't recommend highly enough. But, the simple guidelines for creating questions that generate accountability, not things like blaming or victim thinking or complaining or procrastination, there's 3 simple guidelines. The first one is begin with what or how, not why, when, or who. So it's like, what can I do to help with this? How can I help? Not why is this happening? When is this going to get better? Who's going to make this better? So begin your questions with a what or a how. The second guideline is make sure that your question contains an I, not a they, we, or you. So, I kind of just alluded to it. It's like, what can I do to help the situation? How can I help this player navigate this circumstance? How can I help if I'm a parent with a player and there's a disconnect with the coach? It's not, when are we going to get a better coach? Why did we hire this person in the first place? It's, what can I do to help bridge this gap? How can I make this situation better? And the last thing, the third guideline, is just focus on action. Because if we're talking in like generalities, kind of like we talked about with what does greatness even mean, even though everybody throws that word around, if we're not focused on action, then we're just talking and we're not actually going to make progress towards anything. So those 3 guidelines we wanted to share just as we're thinking about how to ask good questions as players, as parents, and as coaches, and creating a culture that asks good questions is, just to review. Number 1, begin with a what or a how, not a why, when, or who. Number 2 is contain an I, not a they, we, or you. And number 3 is focus on action, because what that comes back to is, like we talked about with the definition of accountability, which is an obligation or willingness to accept responsibility and to account for one's actions. And when we ask those types of questions, we are taking accountability for ourselves and actually contributing to make things better, not just hoping or waiting for a circumstance or another person to change.
Those are guidelines I wish I had when I was playing and growing up, 13, 14 years old, trying to find my way. If those are questions, wonder where it could have taken. I would say taken me. I have played at the highest level, but not only myself, but all the people around me. That's what I look at. And that's what I hope people can take from this podcast is, we all want to set goals. And when people say they want to be like me, I tell them, I want you to be better than me. Take what I didn't do those things, and be better. So those guidelines, those are awesome. Thank you for sharing those, Matt. So now leading into, for our listeners, if this may be the first episode you're listening to, we always do a quick win. Quick win is something that they can take with. We gave you some guidelines, but this is something that should be able to stick with you right after this podcast. And what that is we call it the no BCD. And Matt, what's no BCD?
Yeah. So first of all, no BCD is something that comes from two guys named Tim and Brian Kite. They're a father-son team that talk about discipline and accountability, and they go around and they speak to a bunch of people, and they got some books out there. So I'd highly encourage you to just Google Tim and Brian Kite. But no BCD is one of those. Like in a previous episode, we talked about check your pace. No BCD can kind of become an easy mantra both for ourselves, whether we're a parent, a coach, or a player, or just kind of one of those team motto things that we can encourage our players to use to hold each other accountable. And no BCD it's just the 3 words means B is for blame, C is complain, and D is defend. So anytime we're blaming somebody else, anytime we're complaining about somebody else, or anytime that we're being defensive and defending ourselves, and especially if a teammate or a coach is trying to hold us accountable, those are things that quickly head us in the opposite direction of accountability. So our quick win this week, it's just that simple, no BCD. So you can check your pace, make sure you're prepared, you have a good attitude, and you're concentrating, you have your effort, and then no BCD. Like, don't complain, don't blame, and don't defend, because the circumstances are outside of your control. But if you're responding in ways that are the opposite of blaming and complaining and being defensive, then you're going to put yourself in the best opportunity to succeed.
Well said. Man, I'm sure our listeners could feel the passion we have for accountable teammates in the midst of what a great teammate is. So that's a wrap for today. We need to say thank you to our producer, Cole, and to our MSP staff for all of their support. And most importantly, we thank you, the listener, for tuning in.
And if you haven't already, if you like what you're hearing and you want to go subscribe and get updates whenever we release new episodes every Thursday, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button with wherever you're listening to podcasts. And we are on social media with Twitter and Instagram, and so our handle is @hotcorner_pod POD. So we would just love to hear from you, to engage with you. You can send us your questions, send us topic suggestions, just whatever we can do to help make this podcast something that is meaningful and helpful to you. So we'd love for you to check us out on social media and hit that subscribe button.
So until next time, remember that we're better together, and we'll talk to you next week.